Peace. Good morning, family. How you doing? It's Mr. R2 here at Consistency is Currency, your morning podcast of choice. Like always, we like to thank and appreciate you for being here. Um, Today is the 23rd of June, the very last full week of June. Next week, we roll into the seventh month of the year. I don't know how I got that mixed up. We roll into the seventh month of the year. Just, we're knocking on the door of July. We're knocking on the door of July right now. So if July is your month, hey, let's live it up. Peace. Good morning, Miss Anderson. Today we're talking about self-redemption. Self-redemption is something that you as an individual internally do for yourself. And because uh, there is self-redemption is progressive, but working in the progression of redeeming yourself or acknowledging that some sort of redemption need to take place, that is where we're going to tap into now. Peace. Good morning, Miss Selena. You were second. Normally you first, but you second today. Miss Anderson beat you out. So we're talking about self-redemption. I know the image itself just said redemption, but a lot of times we need to look at what we need to do for ourselves before we even begin to communicate what other people could possibly do for us. I mean, that's just takes a self-assessment that you do for you, because when you do that self-assessment for you, you're actually could possibly be helping someone else, because you don't want to bring your energy into a space where your energy is not needed. You want to bring that type of energy within yourself, so everywhere you go, you become an asset to the body of people, or you just become just that good energy that may be needed. So let's go ahead and tap into self redemption. Go ahead and put redemption in the chat, because we're gonna break it down, and you're going to begin to acknowledge how you can begin to redeem yourself by looking internally at you, not looking at someone else, but actually looking at you. This is a self-reflection that you need to do before you begin to take your next steps going forward. So for those that's new to the platform, we're always going to go into the definition of the words, and then we're going to go into the etymology. This time we got etymology. Then we're going to go into the etymology of the word, which is the root word. But good morning, and I thank you for being here. Those that are watching on Facebook, those that are watching on YouTube, and or those that's listening on a podcast space. If you can find us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, as well as Anchor, and the Facebook podcast platform as well. So we'd like to thank you and appreciate you. So let's go ahead and take this deep dive. Well, not deep dive yet, but let's go ahead and jump in with 2 feet, and let's talk about the redemption. So as you see, the definition of redemption, it says an act of redeeming or atoning for a fault or mistake, or the state of being redeemed. Again, the act of redeeming or atoning for a fault or mistake, or the act of being redeemed. And the inversion on this is white over red, which is an act of redeeming or atoning. The act of redeeming or atoning. And because it says an act, that means that there is something that you have to do. It is something that you take action on. It's not you waiting for somebody else. It's not you worrying about anybody else. It's not you are holding off for somebody else, or you waiting for somebody to do something that you might not get. So it is an act of redeeming or atoning. You redeeming, because we're talking about self-redemption. So that means that you have the power, because an act means you have the power to redeem yourself or atone for the things that you was not so proud of yourself at doing. There's always something that you either just got finished doing something you wasn't proud of, or you have been there to where you've done something that you was not proud of? How many of you have ever been in that moment where you've done something that you was not proud of and you're like, oh man, I feel bad? You can make an atonement. So now let's go into the etymology of redemption. And this is where it begins down for me psychologically on how redemption really plays on an individual's psyche just by looking at the root word of it. So the Latin word for redemption is redemptium. I mean, they could have just left the em off, but cool, whatever. So it says a buying back or off, a releasing, a ransoming, also bribery. Now, let's look at this. This is kind of crazy, but it's kind of how we talk to ourselves inside of our heads, right? Redemption. You want to get that back. You want to get that thing back. So you're buying back. You can't get back the time, but you try to make up for the time by the things that you do in going forward, right? Because again, this is just definition, but putting it in natural terms and context, because it says a releasing. You want to release yourself from the actions that just taken place, or you're trying to release yourself from the things that you know that you were not proud of doing. So it says releasing and ransoming. A lot of time ransoming is our own self-sabotage. We're holding ourselves back from going forward. We're holding ourselves back from releasing that thing. We're holding ourselves in the state of depression because we're holding our gifts for ransom. And then bribery. Again, I'm just using what the etymology is and putting it into the things that most of us either have done or some of us is even currently doing right now. The bribery, like you're bribing yourself, like, okay, yep, you did it. All right, I bet you won't. I bet you'll do this. You're bribing yourself to redeem yourself. Like, okay, I'm gonna do this. You know, if I make this, I'm gonna do this. Or if you do this right now, I'll make sure this won't happen. You're like bribing yourself, telling you that you won't do this if you do this. Or if you do this, I promise I won't do this again. How many of you see that in real time? How many of us have actually done that? Again, I'm just using the words in the definition or going back to the root word, the origin of redemption, and looking at it and putting it in context and how we communicate with ourselves, whether it is just inside of our heads or something that we're physically do or doing. The bribery. How many of you have ever tried to bribe yourself in redeeming yourself for something that you've done, or held yourself for ransom with something that you want to change about you, but because you're holding yourself for ransom, change never came? All right, now this is the one that I love. The Proto-Indo-European root meaning, it says to take or distribute. You're trying to distribute yourself to make change, or even redistributing the pain. Again, to take, that means you're accepting. That means that you have begun to acknowledge the things that could have been done different. So you're taking on or assuming the responsibility of what just took place. Again, this is the pro-European root meaning of redemption. There has to be an accountability measure in order for you to begin to take that next step forward of making it different. To take or distribute. Because I have taken on the truth behind what was done, I have to assume that responsibility and redistribute that pain by changing something. So you too can redeem yourself. That self-redemption is you looking on the inside of you, the inner you, in order for you to begin to develop what tomorrow is going to look like. That self-redemption starts today. So let's take this quick deep dive. If there's something that resonates with you, go ahead and put it inside the chat, because as people look at it on the playback, they may even resonate with something that you're saying. So just make sure you put that in there. So the deep dive into the self-redemption, every now and then we may find ourselves, in a situation that we're not proud of, or reliving something that we regret. And after this situation, you feel embarrassed. You wish that you can take it back, take back what happened. But unfortunately, you know that you can't take back time. You can take a watch and turn of the watch itself, but you can't actually turn back the life. But instead, you can begin to make things right by redeeming yourself. So how are you going to go about redeeming yourself? I think the first thing that you have to know and understand is acknowledge that the action happened. You acknowledge it, because remember, in the etymology, in the Indo-European, it says to take back. And because you took back, that means you assumed it. So therefore, you have to acknowledge it, that it exists. You have to acknowledge that it took place. You have to acknowledge that you had something to do with it. You had to acknowledge that if this is ever going to be different for me, I must know that this took place. Now, how am I going to make it better if I don't acknowledge that the action have actually taken place? Now, you don't have to relive the action, but you must at least acknowledge that it took place. That's where that self-assessment come in. Self-redemption won't happen without self-assessment. And after the self-assessment, then you begin to work and walk in line to where correction comes in. I'm a firm believer that without conviction, there will be no correction. But because there is a conviction that is inside of you, there is a self-assessment that takes place before the conviction can even begin to revive itself. And after you have acknowledged that the action have taken place, you have to begin to commit yourself to change. Because honestly, committing to anything is kind of hard, right? Because there is something inside of you that has to change before the word commitment can even sink in. And it may take you a long time, but you can actually achieve those things by committing to actually doing something different. And when you begin to commit to acknowledging it took place and committing yourself to what change may look like, that's where you begin to change things for the future, because you're changing the present moment, acknowledging what happened in the past, because tomorrow has the ability to happen, but it's what you do right now that's going to make your future that much more better for you. And once you have begun to make that, the only thing that you need to do right now is to begin to follow through with what the changes to be, and it will become permanent. You acknowledge that it has to happen, and you are following through. There is a system. There is consistency. That consistency has to happen too, because once you do it, you have to acknowledge sometimes you just out of your head. A lot of times we're our own worst enemy. The self-sabotage, living inside of our head, making everything harder than what it may seem. Because sometimes the hardest thing about progress is getting out of your own way. The hardest thing about progress is getting out of our head. The hardest thing about progress is talking negatively to ourselves, because we're doubting ourselves that we can even change. But self-redemption can happen when we get out of our own way, when we get out of our head, when we're not feeding ourselves the right mental food, the food for thought. And once you get out of it, the next thing that you have to do is you have to acknowledge that you forgive you. Sometimes this can be the hardest thing to do, especially if we're in our head, because your redemption may be just around a corner after you have forgiven yourself. Take responsibility and find the remedy to forgiving. Find the remedy after you have acknowledged that the action have taken place. It's okay to learn from your mistakes. It's okay to learn from the obstacles and convert those obstacles into opportunity. But the thing that you need to stand firm on the foundation that you have to forgive you. Yes, it happened. Yes, you went through that. But seek the internal restitution to make up for the situations that you have found yourself in, and be specific about what you're forgiving yourself about. Because if you're not specific about what you're forgiving yourself about, then you possibly can begin to do the same thing, because it could be a repeated process, because sometimes you wasn't specific enough about it. Now, I'm sure we've all heard of an airy apology to where it said, yeah, I forgive myself about this. Like, no, be more specific. I forgive myself about saying I'm going on the diet, but not actually holding myself or following through with the diet. I knew that I should have done this. That's being specific about it. So now you're looking at it from a realistic point of view, and you're forgiving yourself because you can pinpoint when it went left. You can pinpoint when the mistake started, because you were specific about where change need to begin. And at that moment, forgive yourself, and then take the proper steps forward into following through. So right now, I think when you're dealing with self-redemption, just stay with yourself. Don't point the finger. Don't say it's somebody else's fault. Just acknowledge that you can change you. You can't change anybody else. They have to do it for themselves. But you can change you. You can sit yourself down. You can write about you. You can examine you. And you can forgive you. Because after you've done all of those things, looking at you, you can be redeemed and atone for the things that you're not so proud of. Because you got it. And because you got it, you can go get it over and over and over again. But that's it. I see y'all tomorrow. And remember, consistency can create currency. Y'all be blessed. Peace.